have an unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Osborne, and you're listening.
This is Mr. Hammond, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
That is right, folks. You heard it correctly. You are listening to Dr. J Radio Live. I am your humble host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, where we are on the Coast to Coast PM radio network, reaching from Los Angeles to Miami, New York to Seattle, Honolulu to London, South Korea, Norway, you name it, it's all included. That's why this is truly an international show. Right off the bat, you have me on the West Coast, where it happens to be 7 p.m. Pacific time. Where my guest and webmaster happen to be is 10 p.m. Eastern time. And, of course, where my co-host happens to be is 3 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, where he is live in London in his studio, staying awake for you folks. As always, we have a super fascinating show for you today because we have a guest that's been on the show quite a few times. And I'm happy to call him a friend because he's contributed so much to this field of ufology and to getting to disclosure, to finally getting us out there for the world to finally accept it, which I believe we're getting much closer. Now, before I announce him, I'm giving you a little time for you guys to see all the social media, all the promotion that we've had about our guest. Let me just say one piece of news. Today happens to be the 47-year anniversary of Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong stepping off the lunar module from Apollo 11, landing on the moon and placing an American flag. The historic day that is still right here. Now, I am going to go and I will introduce our guest, Perter Robbins. He happens to be one of the most respected UFO investigative writers. He's been involved in the field for more than 25 years as a researcher, investigator, writer, lecturer, activist, conference organizer, documentary producer, and author. That's a lot. This is why I say he's contributed so much. Regular fixture on US and UK radio, as you know, and right now it's actually doing both because we have one UK radio network. He has written for numerous online and print publications, some which a lot that I've read, fascinating, and I encourage all of you to do so. And when he's on, I'll let him tell you where you can go read them, both here and abroad, and appeared as a guest and has been a consultant to numerous television programs and documentaries. Roberts, along with Larry Warren, is a co-author of the British bestseller Left at Eastgate, a first-hand account of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, its cover-up and investigation. He is also the author of Deliberate Deception and Halt in Woodbridge. Halt, if you remember everybody, happens to be Colonel Charles Halt, who was the base commander at Rendlesham, or should I say, U.S. Air Force Woodbridge, and of course the Royal Air Force. What was the other name? Bentwaters, Woodbridge Bentwaters. Nonetheless, he was. Let's see. I'm going to skip that part. In 2012, he was made a member of the French academic UFO League. I hope I'm not mispronouncing this. And in 2013 was invited to give testimony at the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure held at the National Press Club, Washington, D.C., where, might I mention, we covered that. And we've had several of, not just the testifiers, the witnesses, we've also had 3 of the committee members. As you know, of course, we've spoken to several, Senator Gravel several times. Congressman Cook has been on the show several times, former, should I say, and retired Congresswoman Hooley has been on this show. So that's very, very important, and I think that was by far the most important event. He is also associate producer of the documentary Travis, the true story of Travis Walton. Peter was born in New York City, and holds a BFA, which is Bachelor's in Fine Arts in Painting, Film History from New York City School of Visual Arts, where he taught painting for more than a dozen years. He has traveled extensively, is an experienced New York City touring guide, and accomplished photographer. And of course, everybody out there, please give him a warm welcome as he's come back fresh from a Rendlesham tour, if I'm not mistaken. And that happens to be, again, the one and only Perter Robbins. Mr. Robbins, welcome back, my friend.
Thank you, Dr. J, and thank you for that glowing introduction.
It's a pleasure. There's a lot more I could even say, because you've done so much in the 25 years, and you've contributed, I have to say, a lot more than a lot of the guests that have appeared on some of the mainstream shows, such as Coast to Coast, or when I was working with Art Bell. That really didn't have very many, but that's a different topic. But nonetheless, you've contributed so much. You're so easygoing, readily available, and have so much work out there. I remember you sent me some links to read of some online publications, which I thought were fantastic. Why don't you tell the listeners where they can read those links?
Some of them are on my website, which is Perter Robbins New York, or PeterRobbinsNY.com. Otherwise, you can really hunt them down online. There'll be an anthology of some of my writing out either late this year or early next year. And otherwise, just come to my talks for sure, or listen to them on Facebook. On YouTube. There are lots there.
That's right. As a matter of fact, there's a few that we have done, and using Jaime Maussan's footage, who graciously gave me over 500 videos that he has vetted as eye candy. So people out there, everybody around the world, can go onto drjradiolive.com, click on the YouTube link, which is our archives, search for Perter Robbins, and you'll see the several shows he's been on, and you'll get to hear him as well as see his book covers and the awesome footage. So, tell us about your latest book. Let's start with that.
It's titled Halt in Woodbridge, as you mentioned, and that does refer to retired now Colonel Charles Halt, who was the deputy base commander of the base, which was RAF Bentwaters. And Charles has, for several decades, certainly been fairly intent on destroying, hurting, questioning the reputation of my co-author.
Larry Warren, right?
Yeah, and I assume that there's pressure on him, and it all came to a head last summer when he had been invited to speak in Woodbridge, Suffolk, which is the town closest to where the events in question happened. And people were invited to attend, 20 pounds a head, that's at the time anyway, because the pound has gone down. That was about $30 American to hear him give a talk. The first part of which, and anybody can listen to it on YouTube, was what I would have hoped and imagined it would have been. He was in a unique position during these 3 nights of UFO activity as the de facto commanding officer, but also as a witness himself, who genuinely suffered in his own way as much as a number of the other people involved because of his association with involvement with this UFO event. In any case, the final part of the talk, he just went off on my co-author to such a great degree that I had to verify what he was saying. And if there were 35 data points that he put out there, and I don't know the exact number, all but 2 or 3 of them were completely untrue. I mean, that's outrageous statistically in any case. And I felt I had to respond. And if he said X, I simply couldn't say Y. I had to present proof that I felt might well be court level if it came to that. And so I spent a lot of time refuting his case, and the book is the result. Now, we know that sometime likely soon, in fact possibly in the next month, he will finally have his own book out, which I believe will be titled The Halt Perspective. And we will see what agrees, what conflicts, and where we go from there.
I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because when he was on, he was talking about the book, and originally, a few months back, it was supposed to have been released in June, but like you said, recently, last week, he told me it's going to be in August, but who knows, it might get pushed further back. Johnny Webb, he's already got a question. Go ahead, Johnny, live in London.
Yeah, we got one from Paula in London, and she's asking, how did you get started in ufology?
Wow, great question, and thank you, Johnny, for passing that on. It quite honestly was with the return of a childhood memory that I had suppressed effectively enough that the person that I witnessed this UFO sighting with, my sister Helen, and I did not talk about it for over 14 years. When that memory returned to me, it came roaring back. I could rattle off what I think were the reasons, but certainly the most important one was that I was ready to address the memory. And it was simply that when I was 14 and she just 12, we had a profoundly unambiguous daylight UFO sighting of 5 silvery white disc-shaped objects in a V formation hanging over the neighbor's house, close enough to make out what we could only read as windows on them. And it was a completely cloudless day. There was nothing else going on in the sky. They were indeed elliptical, like the shape of a dinner plate if you tip it. Silvery white again, and to compress the story, I really couldn't handle it. It challenged everything that I knew, except I had thought that UFOs were nonsensical, like most kids of my generation, and fun for the B-movies, but not real. And when that memory came roaring back, it compelled me to call my sister, and without telling her what I remembered, setting the scene, and she jumped right in, and she remembered it well. And she remembered more, and told me something that absolutely changed my life right then and there, which was something that I had never heard of. I guess in the cultural background, I'm sure I had heard of Betty and Barney Hill, but it was not a subject that interested me at all. And all of a sudden, my sister was telling me memories that I'd now consider archetypical abduction-related memories. And by the end of that call, my life had changed. And I became quite obsessed with the subject, began to learn what I could. For some time kept away from other people in the field. I figured they must be crazy. I knew my sister and I weren't. But ultimately was fortunate enough to end up with some wonderful mentors and great colleagues, and that is how I got involved.
And when you started 25 years ago...
No, it was actually 40 years ago. That introduction you had, I think, is a bit dated.
Gotcha. So that actually fits in line, because you were there investigating 4 years before Rendlesham, because this December will be the 36th anniversary.
Well, it will, and I can't say that I was investigating back then. It's just when I became aware of it and began investigating after the fact. And well before I got involved in looking into the famous British case, which I began investigating in 1987, and officially, although it didn't really count, finished in 1997 when our book was published in the U.S. and the U.K. But I guess certain investigations never really complete, especially ones that you become very involved with.
Now, I'm also glad you mentioned the citizen hearing. And of course, like as you heard from the beginning, that we've had three of the panel members. One of them is fairly old, Roscoe, forgot his last name. He's not quite giving interviews, but there's two more that have said yes, we just haven't had them on.
I see.
I think I've been researching this for 32 years, so you beat me beyond that, well beyond that. But I think it was by far the most seminal time for us to put this out in the open versus Greer's disclosure project that he held in 2001. Can you tell, were you part of that?
Well, I was a part of the disclosure event at the National Press Club in 2013. I was one of 40-odd people, mostly former or currently serving military personnel, government officials and the like, but a handful of us, writers, investigators, authors, etc. And I spoke on Rendlesham, and it was a great honor to do so. It was handled as though it were an actual congressional investigation. However, no serving congressional representatives wanted to be caught dead being associated with the subject of UFOs, apparently. And so it fell to 7 retired, 6 retired congressional representatives and 1 retired senator to sit on a panel. And I think overall it quite blew their minds in a more or less distinguished way. But hats off to Stephen Bassett on his tremendous accomplishment in organizing and funding that event. The videos of it should be in every library of anyone who is serious about the subject, and make fascinating viewing, and I think very challenging viewing for more skeptical minds as well.
Now, can you talk about some of the key players for those who don't understand that have come forward? We know about Larry Warren, we know about Col Halt, and there's 2 others that are regularly, giving interviews, except one that we quite can't get a hold of or has denied it for now, which is Peniston, where the other one, the name eludes me right now, but the reason I'm asking you this is last, I'd say about 6 months ago, there's this sort of drama came up because, what is his name? It's the other gentleman that was with Peniston. Do you recall the name?
John Burroughs?
That's right, John Burroughs. He has a radio show on KGRA with Linda Moulton Howe. And they made the accusation that Peniston was paid off by the CIA or some alphabet soup agency to go along with what they said so he can get his veterans records out. And they accused him of, getting away from the truth of that this had been an extraterrestrial craft and that it had been human time travelers, so he can stop thinking that it was not ours. And I thought that was kind of unfair to bash someone who's not even there to defend himself.
Well, I certainly didn't hear that show, and, there's just an awful lot of disagreement, dissension, acrimony among witnesses and researchers, and that is a very sad fact of this very important series of UFO events. And I guess the best we can do is just approach everything with our most critical senses up, never stop investigating, in a sense, and use our common sense and good judgment in sorting things out for our best. But it's a sad fact of this case.
It is. Now, one thing I really love about Rendlesham, and I'm going to give my little spiel about this. Okay, I'm going to back it up a second to what I said off air. Within ufology, within the study, there are so many different aspects. My 2 favorite topics are alien abduction. Why? Why that topic? Because those people that have been taken or contacted and have been aboard crafts can tell you how the extraterrestrials are communicating with each other, how they're communicating with the humans, what they're doing to them as far as taking a sperm or ova for males and females, what the inside of the craft looks like, etc. The other are crash and retrievals or landings. Now, Rendlesham is exceptionally special because two reasons. It wasn't a crash. It was a landing that happened over 2 nights, if not three nights, and it's in recent history. The key players are still alive.
That's true.
So, let me ask you this. Did you just came back from the UK?
I was in Glasgow, Scotland, where I was speaking at a conference there, and then met up with my friend and colleague Richard Dolan in Athens, where we spoke at the first of what we hope will be a annual, really interesting scientific and UFO-related conference there.
That's fantastic because that's actually my home country. So I got to give you credit. Yeah, I have lots of family in Athens. Both my parents are from Greece. My father's from Volos, my mother's from Tripoli. So
it's a wonderful city
Greece,
and a favorite country of mine.
Yeah, and the fact that they're embracing this and holding a conference.
Well, this was a first. It was not hugely attended, but the commitment of the folks there was really serious, Dr. J, and most of them were professionals. Most of them had a good to very good grasp of English. Presentations were given in English and in Greek, of course. Very well organized, and I'll keep you posted, but I'm hoping that this will become an annual conference and help educate the Greek people about the reality and implications of UFOs, among other things.
I sure hope it does too, because if it does, I will be there with you, in attendance next year if this happens. And I also know that they held some other event about the ancient history, because when Eric von Däniken was on in end of May, right before June, he said that he had just come back from Greece.
Oh.
Yes.
I'm sure there are many conferences there over the course of the year, and what could surprise us less than, anything to do with ancient times, of course.
Now, in the 40 years, and like I said, my humble 32 years, because obviously you were, I was younger when I started, but I was obsessed. So it begs the question, did something happen? But obviously I have no memory of this. I can't be regressed because my mind won't let anybody in. But because I'm, was born Greek, my family did not believe in allowance. So at 5 years old, put to work. First things I purchased were every documentary I could find, any book I could find, and subscribed to magazines, which at the time was, of course, UFO magazine, run by Bill Burns and Nancy Burns, which sadly is gone now, and so is the Open Minds magazine because of the internet. But at the time, this subject was so taboo, and I'm sure 8 years before that, 40 years ago when you started, which would have been 76, I couldn't imagine what people were thinking as calling us loonies, because now it's starting to be more accepted. As the Kepler telescope finds more and more of these Goldilocks planets, these skeptics are sort of cornered because they can't explain it away anymore. It's just a matter of time where, Seth Shostak, when he was on the show not too long ago, was even talking about that there are so many planets that are Earth-like. But see, that limits it because, for instance, we're carbon-based. There was a crop circle that suggested that one species or one race of the Greys was silicone-based. If that's the case, then all of a sudden the expansion of searching skyrockets, because it no longer focuses on what's Earth-like, because it doesn't accommodate something that's made of another substance or a different atmosphere. Because if you do that, then these 100 or 200, however many Goldilocks planets have been found, all of a sudden will be, up 1,000, 2,000 planets that could potentially hold life. Now, here on Earth, we've already discovered that you don't necessarily need, all the elements of what Earth has to support life. And the reason I say this is, for instance, the bottom of the ocean. There's no light there. The sun can't hit it there. But yet we find life. Same thing with Antarctica. You don't expect anything to live there in sub-degree temperatures or sub-zero temperatures. But what do you find? You find life thriving. Wherever, any place on Earth, even near volcanoes, the life is thriving. So if you take those facts into consideration, then we should be looking everywhere, and not just the Goldilocks planets. Now, I'm going to ask you this. How do you feel in your own personal experiences over the last 40 years, how the evolution of the study of ufology has gone?
Good question. When I became involved in the mid-'70s and began to learn that there was this group of people, who really focused in on studying this stuff and had conferences and the like, and then this organization, MUFON, and started to read their publications and the like, the field was in a place where the big attention was on lights in the night sky, radar return cases, trace cases, landings on the ground where physiological changes had been made to organic material, but nothing really on what we now call the abduction phenomena. And it's important to remember that 40 years ago, even more than now, the subject was really struggling for something approaching legitimacy. Just the idea that, you're a grown-up and you're interested in flying saucers would make you, somebody dismissive in the presence of a lot of unaware people. And the depth of, the cultural understanding that it's nonsense and that there really is ridicule attached to taking it seriously. My point being that, as David Jacobs once summed it up so wonderfully, our attention was on the cars, not the drivers. And it just seemed it would be pushing the frontier too far to suggest that. Same thing for crashes and retrievals to a great degree. I don't know how many of the claims of crash and retrieval are provable to be authentic.
That's right.
But there's certainly something to it, and there are, starting with Roswell. But people like Leonard Stringfield, who really was the pioneer researcher in the idea of crashes and retrievals, was, working away, was respected, but was way in the minority. I think the changes really began to happen with the publication of Bud Hopkins' first book in 1981, which was Missing Time, which specifically zoned in on this common thread among people who do seem to have been through, some variation of the abduction experience, that they were missing time, often 90 minutes or so. And the book really changed ufology and at the same time put a new phrase into the American language.
I would definitely have to agree with that statement. And one step further, the second book, or it may be another, maybe a third, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but when he released Intruders, that I got my hands on that and I read it. And
well, you're right. That was his next book. That was his second book, and probably his best-selling book. And it was a knockout.
And this past year, in 2016, early on this year, we interviewed Debbie Jordan Cobble, who...
she's one of my favorite people.
Yeah, very down to earth and can still recall, a lot of the events that happened to her. So,
yeah.
So, like you said, this brought these cases into the forefront, where I feel sorry for all the people who have been taken over the years prior to that who couldn't say anything because they would be labeled loons or some other nasty term and thrown into a psychiatric ward when they're just telling the truth.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things you wrote on was about Travis Walton, and this is ironic in the sense that 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, would be 5 years ago this past March, the first show I ever did, radio show, because I was interviewing people in person at the time. Before that, Travis Walton was my first guest.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah, and so it's always a pleasure to have him on, but I haven't gotten much more information other than his newest book, which is basically the same. It's just got some additional information, such as when he went back to visit the area, couldn't find the particular area because apparently the radiation from the craft had caused the tree, or the trees, should I say, plural. I don't know if it was one tree or the set of trees, to grow in such a substantially higher rate than those around them that it had trouble finding them. And when cut, when you see the rings of growth, there is a big either gap or something to signify that year of, was it 75, that's right, because he just had his 40-year anniversary in November. That year, that winter, had such significant growth than the decades before or the decades since. And so my question to you is there anything you can tell us other than what's known in his book Fire in the Sky, also portrayed in the movie made by Tracy Torme of the same name, Fire in the Sky?
Yeah. Well, yes, I can. In fact, as of last year, and now in almost final cut, is an outstanding new feature-length, like 90-minute or so documentary on Travis Walton's being taken, as you noted, in November of 1975. And I'm proud to have been an associate producer on the film. I have to say, Jennifer Stein, our executive producer, did a yeoman's job, absolutely remarkable, of bringing in what I consider not just a really outstanding UFO documentary, but a really outstanding documentary. So much so, and I have to say, I have been to and worked at least 15 screenings of the film around the country, and a week and a half ago in Greece with Greek subtitles for the first time.
Nice.
It really is first rate, and something you can lend or give to your skeptical friends and then say, let's talk after you watch this. But to your specific question, and we know exactly where the location is in the wilderness there. It's an incredibly remote area, and I had the amazing experience of going out there with quite a number of other people last November, a few days after the 40th anniversary, with Travis to the exact location where he was kind enough to essentially relive it for us there with two of the other witnesses right there on location. Pretty special stuff. But you were referring to the tree rings. Right there at the location is a tree stump. And I think it was within 50 feet, I forget, of where Travis was actually hit by this blue beam of light. And there is no question. You see the entire growth history of a tree in the rings. And the first half of its life, the rings were like clockwork, basically bing, 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 the same distance of millimeters or whatever the count is from each other. And then along comes 1975. And of course you can't fake these things. It's, tree rings don't lie. And from then on you see the size of the tree rings more than doubles for years. Bong, 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 bong. And most intriguing and for me exciting is the side of the tree that actually faced where Travis was rather than away from it, noticeably extends outward in that direction in future tree ring years. Whatever affected that tree in 1975 affected it dramatically and in the right direction and in the exact right time frame. It's one of many, many, many pieces of court-worthy level evidence that make Travis's experience as airtight and as important and as significant an event of its kind, but it also is very moving. The documentary balances the scientific aspects with the real humanity, the lives touched, archival footage, commentary by individuals who are knowledgeable in certain aspects of the different subjects that dovetail into Travis's story. For the record, it's called Travis, The True Story of Travis Walton. It is a documentary, and it is available from the producer's website, which is onwings.com, except that wing has an E in it, ONWINGES.com. Travis Walton documentary, first rate.
That actually won the EBE award at the 2015 UFO Congress, right?
That's right, last year. In fact, Jennifer was so intent on getting it into the competition that she submitted it before it was 100% completed. So we're all the more moved that it won that competition. But honestly, I think it has won 12 film festival competitions as well in the intervening year and a half, which of course we're very proud of.
We have two questions coming in. I'm going to turn it to Johnny because one is across the Atlantic pond, and then I'll ask the American question. Go ahead, Johnny.
It's a two-part question, actually. It comes from Giovanni in Italy, but he doesn't say where on Facebook. He asks Peter, what's he doing with Richard Dolan in Athens? But his first part of the question was, can he say where he could see your lectures? So it's a two-part, I suppose.
Where he could see my what?
The lecture. That's
if Giovanni simply goes onto YouTube and types in Perter Robbins UFO, you'll get many hits that will bring you to links that will let you watch and listen to lectures I've done both here and abroad. And as to his first question, what brought Richard and I to Athens was a first-of-its-kind conference. It was organized, I think, brilliantly by dear friends in Athens who were not approaching the subject of UFOs as such from the world at large, but through their scholarship, their study, their interest, and active involvement in the work and discoveries of Dr. Wilhelm Reich and the science that he developed called orgonomy, which is simply the science of how energy functions. There is an active community of remarkable people in the greater Athens area and all over Greece, actually.
If I could jump in, Richard, it's Johnny Webb in London. There's a famous British musician lady called Kate Bush, and she dedicated a whole song, Cloudbuster.
The Cloudbuster song, I remember it well. And our dear Patti Smith sings a song based on Reich's son's book, A Book of Dreams, remembering his father. But yeah, Kate knocked it out of the park with that for sure. But this conference, and again, I have to say, very professionally done, first focused in on Dr. Reich's final book, which was published posthumously a month after he died in December of 1957, The book and the conference were titled Contact with Space. And although a brilliant, courageous, well-documented book, it's probably the worst first book to read of Dr. Reich's, because he just launches into his observations of deductions about and conclusions regarding the UFO phenomena, and without any grounding in his more than 35 years of brilliant writing and published scientific findings and book after book, you know, you'd think the guy was losing it, but anything but, as it turned out. So I was there in part to make the personal connection between Reich studies, which I've been involved in since I was a teenager, really, and the UFO phenomena. Richard, of course, nobody better than having him there to give an overview of the UFO phenomena and then to focus in on what we may be facing in terms of the realities out there. Also, a friend and colleague, Andrew Johnson, from England, was also a speaker on both days, speaking on conspiracy-related subjects, and again, you know, very well grounded. One of the leading ergonomists, one of the doctors, practitioners spoke. Organizer Jenny Sari spoke, and we were all aware that, except for, you know, not seeing the numbers that we wanted, that this was a truly historic conference, and the enthusiasm was phenomenal. The word of mouth is already very up, and I am optimistic that we're going to be seeing a Contact with Space conference every summer in Athens, and a lot of us will put in the work to make it happen.
You've got quite a following, you know, fan book following in the UK here for your ufology studies. You know, how do you compare the Americas and even Athens, for this case, on the UFO research? Is there a differentiation between?
Well, the group that Rich and I spoke with are really just beginning to take a hard, serious look at the UFO phenomena. We're looking to see more books on the subject published in Greek language, and now that it's opened up among this group of people, the enthusiasm is there. I mean, how can anyone with an intelligent, open mind not be interested in what these things may be and what the implications of those ones may also be? I've seen the same in so many locations, Johnny, including Japan and Brazil and Scandinavian countries, Italy. It's a universal thing that really does bring us together, and for me, that's maybe its greatest real-life asset. If you take seriously the subject, that we are not alone, and that our first world governments do all they can to keep facts from us. Part of the reason is it will be a very nasty thorn in the side of nationalism in general if people come to realize that we are not alone in the universe. And horror of horrors, we may actually begin to think of ourselves first, again, as human beings, with a great deal more in common than less in common with our fellow human beings. And second, our nationalities, our professions, our religions, our sexes, whatever. And that's a reason right there to keep the subject confusing and not answer the questions.
We need to all come together. We need to stop this primitive tribal warfare. We have we have a live caller and a question waiting. I'm going to take back seat to the written question first to go to the live caller. I just want to give you a heads up that we have about 15 minutes left. If I could ask you, Peter, if you could just hang on for 1 minute after the show.
You bet.
I could talk. Area code 801, welcome to the show. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Andy, it's Nathan. I talked to you yesterday. I'm just listening on the show for now.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You called in during Chris Bledsoe. Okay, let me get to this question right here. This comes from also the East Coast. Let's go find it where we lost it. It is Lisa from Raleigh, North Carolina. It says, hold on a second. Okay. Clifford Stone mentioned 56 different species. In your 40 years of research, how many different species do you think exist?
Oh, thank you, Lisa. I think that's an important question. Over the decades, like anybody in the work, I've heard different numbers quoted. And with respect to all of these people, dear Clifford included, I really have to discount them. First, you face the practical question of how can anyone know, as an empirical fact, that the number that they believe is the number is correct. You know, if one was the President of the United States, the Queen of England, the Prime Minister, President of Russia, the head of all the intelligence agencies in the world, and the head of, 6 supreme races of alien beings all rolled into one, how could you really know how many were visiting Earth? So I have to say, I don't take any of those numbers seriously. I do assume, I think sensibly, that it's considerably more than one, and that they have different potential relationships with humanity, that they may have different wishes for us, positive or minus. But as for specific numbers, I'd always be careful of them.
And even Travis, on his own experience, talked about 2 different species. One that were human-looking.
Oh, yeah.
One that were, the typical, well, not quite the grays, but they had large eyes, or they had the large eyes removed to show actual irises and a pupil. Nonetheless, we still have more questions coming in, and this is across the pond, so I'm going to give it to Johnny to ask it. Go ahead, Johnny. Read it.
Well, I suppose it's to an earlier statement, but Connor in Scotland asks on Facebook, does your sister still receive visitations and abductions?
Thank you for that question. I wish she did. We lost my sister in January of 2000. However, she only had 1 or 2 experiences in adult life that she had any real recall of. If there were others, she was not aware, but she certainly remembered the one that triggered my obsession with great detail for the rest of her life.
Joe in St. George, Utah, is asking whether you think you possibly have been taken yourself.
Great question. I wondered, how could I not wonder after my sister had told me about her memory, and that I knew that I was knocked out or passed out or made to be turned off or whatever, which is a pattern we do see sometimes with siblings or couples or whatever when one is taken and one isn't. To pursue that question, over the next few years I underwent regressive hypnosis with 3 different practitioners. One, an old friend who had qualified to do hypnotic regression, but really no special interest in the subject I was looking into. Several years after that, with one of my mentors, a detective sergeant, New York City Police Department, a New York City police detective who had been specially trained in regression for criminal investigation. And then with Bud Hopkins, my mentor and somebody I worked with and for many years as the real pioneer researcher in the scientific study of the abduction phenomena. More, I think, given all the very specific phobias that we came to see abductees were liable to have, other traits, none of them ever triggered for me. And I would think in my heart, after 40 years, if it had happened to me, I'd have some sense of it by now.
Here's a question actually from a listener that goes sort of to the beginning, but it just came now. Ricky Adams in Midland, Texas, Has Mr. Robbins read Col Halt's book? If so, any thoughts?
Well, from what Ricky says, I think then we can assume the book is out. And no, I haven't. And I wonder if he has read my book, Halt in Woodbridge. But I intend to read his book, most certainly. And if it is out now, I'll look for it. If not, I will look for it soon.
And let me say this to you, Ricky, out there. Make sure you go to drjradiolive.com, our website, and click on the tab that says Books and Videos. Every guest who's ever appeared, it'll take you a link directly to where you can purchase their books and videos. And don't forget to check Mr. Robbins' website, which is peterrobbinsny.com or peterrobbinsnewyork.com. Lots of great information there. Again, we're coming down to the last a little over 5 minutes. So I'm going to ask you this about crash and retrievals. Aside from Roswell and the landing at Rendlesham, are there any other cases that stick out in your head aside from what History Channel talks about, which is Kecksburg?
Well, there are kind of the crash at Corona is Stanton Friedman's book on Roswell, which I find absolutely fascinating. The one that I'm thinking of is one that occurred in Mexico. Hold it 1 second, literally.
Peter, you still there? Let's see here.
Yeah, I think he's there. He just said 1 second.
That Dr. J. Right. I thought I had the book at hand. I have to beg off on that one. I just haven't been focusing on it for such a long time. But am refocused on Roswell as we have the 70th anniversary coming up next year.
Right. That's right.
And I'm been asked to speak on it for a very special group, and I'm working on what I hope will be a very special presentation of it.
I hope to make it there. Roswell has always been something I've been looking to since
Sure.
1984 and the annual festival there. And of course, I know lots of guests who've been on the show speak there, and it'd be amazing to see you in person there. So,
indeed,
we have another one coming, I believe, across the pond. So go ahead, Johnny. Anything that's American based, I'm going to read. Anything that's European based, or even from South Korea or Australia or anywhere like that, because we get calls and questions from
Sure.
there. I leave it to my international co-host. Go ahead, Johnny.
Well, I'd like a lot more from the UK, but they seem to be very European. This one comes from Dirk in Bremen in Germany on Facebook. And he asks, what have you come to learn of the UFO circuit hanging out with other ufologists? Do you still find they're making progress on disclosure?
Boy, what a great question. I guess each in their own way. What I see are overall busy, committed, interesting people who have carved out what we'll laughingly call a career, because it's a crazy career decision, let's face it. If you are good enough, if your work is well received enough, if you're regarded well by your readers and the public, you have a chance to add something, maybe some of your own enthusiasm to the pool of public knowledge. One of the things I like most about what's come to be known as the disclosure movement is how, it's not changing the world overnight hardly, but people are educating other people in their community, across America to a degree, but even more so across Europe, including Germany, of course, where individuals are simply educating each other, and things are changing 1, 2, 4, 7 people at a time. At best, I really enjoy the camaraderie of hanging out with colleagues, many of whom I have formed real friendships with over the years, but don't get to see that often. And other times you'll, bump into each other a few times in a row over a relatively short period of time if you're fortunate enough to be speaking at those conferences.
Here is actually yet another one, and then I'm going to ask one, and then unfortunately we're
Sure.
out of time. Okay, Cynthia Thomlin, Tamakia, Pennsylvania. Was Vince Foster a suicide?
I have no idea, Cynthia. Like every American, I guess, I have a thought on it, but it has nothing to do with my research specialty, and I'm not sure if it's a question we'll ever have the answer to.
Now, I'm going to bring it back to disclosure. As you said, if 5 or 7 people are coming closer, that's my goal. That's why, as a passive researcher for 27 years, I finally said, you know what? Why not do something and become proactive? So if one person each night will start to look at things differently and become acclimated to this subject, and we move closer to disclosure, I feel good. I feel like my job is getting done as a host and someone who's sharing this knowledge and having prestigious guests such as yourself. So with that being said, what do you think of the fact that we truly have been acclimated? And let me give you an example. Ancient Aliens, right? The first time it was a one-off. And prior to this, for 20 years, every time a TV show, mainstream television or cable television, had anything regarding extraterrestrials or ancient astronauts or anything like that, for every minute we'd have a speaker or a lecture researcher that was pro-ufology. You'd have a skeptic countering their argument. Even on Larry King Live, I remember, I don't know his name, but he was bashing Edgar Mitchell, which was pathetic. But then season 1 comes out, and now it's on, according to Giorgio Tsoukalos, when he was on a couple months ago, talked about they just renewed for yet another season. So I think they're airing the 10th season and doing an 11th season. You don't see any more skeptics. And same thing with unsealed UFO files. None of that shows skeptics anymore. So I think we've had a lot of progress. You being in this for 40 years, wouldn't you agree that we're actually inching closer to disclosure rather than just in your face, here they are, here's the truth?
Well, I hope so. Certainly we are moving away from the overwhelming judgments of people that the subject is nonsense. Let me put it this way, and I think a lot of my colleagues would agree with me, especially if they're out there working these events and meeting the people attending them. Every year, certainly in this country, more and more people care less and less what other people think about what they think about the subject of UFOs and its implications.
Agreed. Unfortunately, Mr. Robbins, we are out of time. And like I said, just please hang on till after. I want to, aside from promoting your books and your articles and your website once again, I'd like to give you a chance to give a final statement to everybody out there, believers, skeptics, and those on the fence. And fortunately, the skeptics are shrinking, so that's a good thing. But what would you say to this global audience?
Well, if you're really interested in learning more about this uniquely important subject, educate yourself. And your two best tools are always going to be your critical thinking and your common sense. There's so much nonsense out there. If you'd like to hear what I have to say in person, my next 3 appearances are the end of this month in Kingston, New York, where a group called Creative Seminars is presenting a UFO conference, and I'll be there with my colleagues Jennifer Stein and Richard Dolan and Laird Scranton and a number of others. And the one after that won't be speaking, but will be emceeing this summer's MUFON Symposium, the end of August in or near Orlando, Florida. And that same weekend, although I can't be emceeing it or attending it, in beautiful Portland, Maine, is the Experiencers Speak Conference, which I also hope people will be able to attend. And I guess other than that, keep your sense of humor and hope that they're not like the ones in Mars Attacks.
That's right, and having an open mind. With that being said, I want to thank you, Mr. Robbins, so much. Everybody, make sure you go to his website. Again, it's www.peterrobbins with two B's or peterrobbinsny.com, where you could see the link in his bio on our website. Don't forget, the name of the show is Dr. J Radio Live. It's also the name of the website and every social media account. To see or hear the archive of this show, once it's posted, it'll be, of course, on YouTube for free for everybody to hear. Again, what's the name? Dr. J Radio Live. And like I said, every single social media account, from Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, Facebook, Gmail, Google+, Slack, Pinterest, it's all the same. And of course, don't forget, we post our guests the night before they come instead of the week of. So constantly check the website out. And we always welcome your comments and questions. And of course, if we get questions for the guests after the show, we always follow through with them, or we save them until we bring the guest back. So I also want to thank Ira Robinson and Michael Vara for Late Night in the Midlands for carrying our show and syndicating it as well. Also want to thank Angel Espino for carrying our radio show on PSN, and of course all the terrestrial stations in America, both in FM and AM, that are carrying Dr. J Radio Live. And don't forget, JC, I want to thank him very much, and Johnny Webb for setting that up in the UK, carrying that show right there. Now, I also want to thank my team. Of course, we have Tom Schaefer, webmaster, who does a lot of work behind the scenes and archive. Same thing with Johnny Webb. He's not just my co-host, he does a lot behind the scenes, such as right after this, he's going to get this up and running to play on the other networks. So great thanks to Johnny Webb and Tom Schaefer, and for those team members that I haven't mentioned, such as Lou Sheehan and everybody else, you know who you are. I want to thank you. But the most important people I want to thank are you, the listener. You guys and gals are the reason we are doing this. If it wasn't for your enthusiasm and interest in this topic, and wanting to learn more from paranormal, and requesting guests such as Perter Robbins to come on the show time after time, we thank you from the bottom of our heart. Now hang tight, and now you're going to hear, right before you hear our outro, because of the political season, you're going to hear a little somebody giving a little promo, followed by Congressman Cook. So everybody check this out as I, Dr. J, sign off.
This is Mike Dukakis, the former governor of Massachusetts, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
I'm former Congressman Merrill Cook, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio
Good show
Live.
tonight.
No, we're live.